I thought we were going to do the Mandalorian, but then I got really distracted by these fruits.
So this whole podcast is going to be on fruits. We're talking oranges. We're talking apples.
Tangerine.
Bananas. Tangerines, of course.
Nectarine.
Nectarines. Anything in the citrus family with teen at the end, we're talking about. Welcome to Pandora's Box. My name is Tyler Gardner, and I thought for today, maybe Christian, did you want to give the intro? Should we shake things up a little bit?
Let's see if I remember it.
We've only been doing the same thing.
We've only been doing it for the entire
months,
season.
So, yeah.
Welcome to Pandora's Box. On this podcast, we discuss our favorite fandoms in terms of our thoughts, theories, and opinions. We like to do a little production analysis as well as story dissection. I'm joined, as always, by my friend and co-host, Tyler motherfucking Gardner.
Hello. Nice to be here. Yeah, I thought we'd shake it up a little bit. Today's going to be kind of interesting. We're going to be breaching into a topic that we had discussed, I think, right after we talked about Andor. Like, it makes more sense just go right into this topic.
This was one of the first things that we wanted to do on the podcast. So it's kind of ironic that this is towards the tail end of the season.
It only took us 8 months to get to it. Yeah. So, Christian, did you want to kind of introduce us? What are we talking about?
Yeah, so The Mandalorian, it's actually an exciting one because I feel like no matter when this comes out, if it comes out like in a couple months, if it comes out in a couple months or it comes out in a year, it's still going to be super popular because The Mandalorian kind of blew everyone away in the Star Wars family. Because, you know, we kind of had this really dark age of the sequel trilogy where everyone's just like, oh God, Disney, what have you done? And then we got rewarded for our patience with the franchise with one of the most amazing, like, Cowboys in Space style, you know, Mandalorian events, which is, you know, we all loved Django, we all loved Boba. So this was one of the most cool concepts to explore. And, you know, obviously you got fucking Baby Yoda, so it's hard to take an L on any of this. So we're finally going to go into a deep dive on The Mandalorian, which I'm very excited about. Tyler has put together this magnificent PowerPoint with this beautiful Mandalorian walking away from the sunset, and I am excited to see what you have in store for us.
Well, to be honest.
Fight!
I had zero intention of talking about the Mandalorian show. I figured instead we'd start with the Mandalorians.
Can we for a second, just for the people that have no idea what the fuck flashed on the screen? So we just had a repeating meme of Jango Fett getting his head cut off by Mace Windu.
I completely nixed the idea of talking about the Mandalorian show. Research was a bit of a bitch. So I figured instead we would talk about the Mandalorians as a culture or people. There's a lot of backstory and history. So if that's okay with you, Christian, I'd like to dive into instead, what are Mandalorians?
Yeah, it's a decent parallel.
Cool.
And but we could probably reference the show along the way.
Yeah, there might be some of that in there,
Yeah.
For sure. So let's just get a quick glimpse at what the hell are Mandalorians.
You really came in clutch with your memes today, man.
Yeah.
So that
all
one,
of this was
one was just a compilation of all the Mandalorians across the wavelengths.
That was birthed out of multiple sessions of Past Midnight, me working on the original show podcast, and I just said, fuck it. So yeah, who the fuck are the Mandalorians? Christian.
You were a full-grown man when you were 7 years old? There's a Mandalorian picture and it says Tyler at 7 years old.
You never had, like, whenever you had the costume, you'd have to pose like him?
Oh yeah, for sure.
You want to tell us a little bit about what you might know as the Mandalorians?
I will admit, and this has probably become evident in our first season, Tyler is definitely our resident expert on Star Wars. I am simply what would you say, an admirer of Star Wars. So I don't know a whole lot about certain things. I do know, based on how much I really was aggressively diving into The Mandalorian. I thought it was an amazing show, so I watched the entire thing all the way through a couple of times. As for the Mandalorians as a race specifically, I do know that they are one of the more, how would you say, not prolific, but like regal and well renowned of all the races in Star Wars. There's a lot of people that put respect on their names. A lot of the times, especially in the Mandalorian show, you have people being like, "Oh shit, a Mandalorian!" And it's because they have like kind of a legend that kind of goes with them across the galaxy, which is one of the very few races I think in Star Wars that carry that kind of weight with them. Because I mean, sure, you got the Hutts that everyone's like, "Oh shit, the Hutts are around," and you got like the Jedi. You have which is more of a creed, but you have the Jedi. You have this, that, and the other thing. But Mandalorians are definitely a staple. I would say that they're one of the more interesting ones, which is kind of funny because you don't see a whole lot of them in the first 6 movies.
Yeah.
All you see is Jango Fett, who is not correct me if I'm wrong, but he's not actually connected with Mandalore at the time of the movies because he's not really working or from Mandalore, right? Well, I mean, he is from Mandalore, but he has no connections with them as of the movies.
He did, but we will say at the time of the movies, he wasn't really working towards the Mandalorian interests, I should say, but he still had a lot of connections. We'll go into that later on, but you are correct for the most part. He was not like directly affiliated with Mandalore.
He didn't have any kind of attachments that pertain to anything of import with the story.
Yes and no.
Yes and no. Okay.
Yeah. Again, we'll go into
explore it. Yeah. In terms of them as a species, or I guess as a species, a culture. I know that they are very warrior-esque, a bit of a tribal mentality in terms of like the strength of numbers is you're only as strong as your weakest link. So they make sure that everyone is tough, everyone can fight.
Yeah.
Mandalorians value their armor, and because of their armor, they're one of the few people that could actually stand up to the Jedi because full-blown Beskar armor could block even lightsabers for the most part for a duration. They also were just extraordinarily skilled so that they could be toe-to-toe with Jedi for the most part. In the Mandalorian, the first season, the armor kind of is a bit of our lore master, a resident lore master in the series, and discusses the Mandalorians versus the Jedi in the ages-old war. She kind of tells them Din doesn't know anything about Star Wars Jaren, which is what they call him because he doesn't even. I always find it funny that the main character of a Star Wars movie seems to know the least about Star Wars. Yeah. He has no idea what the fuck Force is.
Yeah.
He doesn't know what a Jedi is. He looks at Luke Skywalker after wielding a lightsaber and coming in full blast onto the bridge of the ship. Are you a Jedi? It's like, what do you think, man? Other than that, I do know that the Empire destroyed their living area, if you could say. They bombed the hell out of Mandalore and scattered kind of the people throughout the galaxy. And that's kind of where the Mandalorian takes place, is kind of in the wake of all this destruction right after the Empire has been kind of brought down by the hammer of the New Republic. And sorry, I saw the baked custard dessert that is
Mandalorians are very interesting. One, obviously, because of the story in the Mandalorians, but how they were affected by the Disney takeover is very interesting. Because they didn't retcon most of the history for the Mandalorian. They did retcon everything that happened ABY for the most part, but there are a couple of interesting things that draw similarities, and it seemed almost like Disney was trying to pluck certain things and recreate them to fit into the Disney canon, such as the destruction of Mandalore, which did happen in the expanded universe, and it also happened in mainstream canonical Disney Star Wars as well. A lot of that is too, Disney seemed to harp on a lot of other things that had already been written pre-Disney takeover, so we're going to look into that as too. A lot of names especially too, and a lot of different events that led to the Mandalorians and where we are, and even how Din Djarin came to be. So the most important things about Star Wars I've seen them trash since the Disney takeover, but this is one of the few aspects, which is why I thought it was very important that we talk about everything that happened before.
It is kind of funny though when you think about it, because I think everyone respects that except for the Mandalorians themselves, because they're like, oh shit, you didn't save our planet in the in the remake.
We'll get to that. So for who the fuck are the Mandalorians? They are nomadic. They're clan-based people, so they're all about family. They're all about clanship.
Family.
For most of their history, they consist of people from all sorts of species, all sorts of walks of life. They follow a leader. That leader is known as the Mandalore. In Mandalorian language, the Mandalore quite literally translates to soul leader or soul ruler. They've also been seen on both sides of pretty much every single major galactic conflict. So they've been fighting for the Sith, against the Sith, for the Jedi, against the Jedi, and sometimes they've been on their own side, fighting everybody else. When you use the term Mandalorian, you could be referencing the culture, you could be referencing the language, you could also be referencing the species. There was originally a Mandalorian species, and then there was...
And wasn't that a uniqueness within the Mandalorian TV series? Because
What's that?
Din Djarin is not of the species of Mandalorian.
The species does not exist when the movies came about. The species died thousands of years ago, but we're going to go into them a little bit.
Okay.
Yeah. So
I guess the modern, quote unquote modern, if you consider the Mandalorian as modern, the modern Mandalorians are only considered Mandalorians based on geographic heraldry. Like they're from the planet Mandalore.
Not even. That's kind of the interesting thing about them. You could be a Mandalorian, and it doesn't matter where you're technically based out of, just because you're not from Mandalore. Like Din Djarin's not from Mandalore.
Yeah.
Like Jango Fett, I don't even think was from Mandalore.
But I think the royalty, Bo-Katan, was from Mandalore.
We're gonna get into that because there's some severe distinctions.
Once again, the between all the different podcasts, we've run into the jumping ahead theme.
Yeah, there's a lot of different things going on in there, so it's gonna be very hard for us by the end of this, even still, to probably pinpoint who is a Mandalorian, who is not a Mandalorian.
Right. So it's a mixed bag of treats, I guess.
Yeah, the Mandalorian as a whole, you can consider pretty much just a melting pot of anybody who wants to follow the Mandalorian creed, if you will. There was only some serious changes that happened a little bit after 1000 BBY, but again, we'll go into those, which will actually show us the segmentation that we're seeing on screen, both from the Clone Wars show, the movies, the Mandalorian show, and the assumed other shows and media that they're going to be coming out with.
This is the way.
And where the fuck did they come from?
Sorry, that threw me off. We usually just really enunciate the U, but that was so fast.
Where did they come from? Where are they? What's the deal with them?
Yeah.
So, just really quickly, recorded history places the Mandalorians. Oh, this is a really cool tool we're going to use. This has a laser pointer tool. Recorded history places them on the planet Coruscant or Neutron. What's that?
No, this is the idea that it's like a laser pointer on a planet, but to them it's just like a massive beam.
Like an actual laser. The Death Star laser, yeah. So 25,000 BBY, or plus BBY, you'll see Mandalorians first talked about on Coruscant. Eventually they make their way from Coruscant to another planet.
First talked about?
First talked about.
What do you mean by first talked about?
Recorded, written down.
Okay.
Where the origins of Mandalorian as a species and a people originates with the planet Coruscant, which is pre 25,000 BBY.
So is it the insinuation in that case that the Mandalorians were originated and native to the inner core?
Yeah, again, that piece of information eluded me. I could not find it anywhere. Simply, like I said, the first recordings or writing downs of them existing as a species placed them here. Yeah. There was no mention of where they were prior to.
It's cool to have a mystery, man.
Yeah, I wish I was able to find it.
Yeah, no, it's cool.
Researching Mandalorians for years.
So the first time they were ever spotted was on the planet Coruscant.
Yep.
That's interesting.
We're going to go into their history, but this is more just kind of a placement.
Yeah.
They made their way from Coruscant after they left to another planet. Eventually, they founded the planet Mandalore. They came across, conquered it. Planet Mandalore is important because that's where they discovered the mythosaurs. They conquered them, exterminated them.
Now, actually, just to help because I know it's been quite some time. In the podcast releases, it's probably not been that much time at all, and I'm just sounding stupid. But in real time, it's been a few months since we've gone over the geography of Star Wars. Is the planet Mandalore version 1.0? Is that in the outer? It's in the outer. I'm interesting.
We're gonna go into it. Don't worry, I got maps. I got you ready, my guy.
He's like, I have brought the facts today.
They conquered two planets pretty simultaneously. Well, one's not a planet, but the original planet was not named. They named it Mandalore.
Okay.
Hence their name, Mandalorians, because they were not called Mandalorians prior to taking over the planet Mandalore. There's also another moon called Conquered Dawn. That's this little moon right here. Completely utterly fucked. If you can't tell, that was like exploded outward. They talked a little bit about it in the Rebels series. Not too much actually about it in either histories, both mainstream and expanded.
Wow, so the Mandalorians not only lost a planet, they lost a moon as well.
They lost a lot of times. This is the same planet as you can see. This is originally what the planet looked like. This is, version 1. Fucked. This is them. And this was the interesting part, because in expanded universe, technically, I would say up until the Clone Wars, because you see references of this in the Clone Wars when they show you shots of the planet when the planes are flying in. It's completely barren desert. That happened due to some issues that happened about 700 years prior, which did decimate the planet. And then later on, there was supposedly a second decimation due to the Empire that classified the.
Oh, so the Empire wasn't the first to dip its hand in Mandalorian destruction.
The planet itself, no. There's two supposed recorded instances of them getting completely ass fucked.
No, it's like the world of Kenshi, just constantly just getting demolished.
Yeah, they can't win on that planet.
No.
So through time and space, pre 25,000 BBY, you have the humans and the Tongs. The Tongs up there. That's like the Mandalorian species. They were fighting for control of Coruscant, known as the planet Neutron. This is also where they got the name the Warriors of the Shadow, or the Da Huerta Verda, because during this conflict between the humans and the Tongs, a volcano erupted that covered the entire planet in obviously volcanic ash and smoke. And the Mandalorians took this as a sign of their preeminent victory, so they assaulted the humans. And that specific day, they won the day, sort of thing. But in the long run, they accidentally they lost. They were kicked off planet.
So that's interesting. So is that in the upper left-hand corner? Is that a Tong?
Yep. This is what they originally looked like. This was the Mandalorian species. They were known as the Tongs. They were not known as the Mandalorians at that point.
Interesting. So the Tongs, Taungs, they look kind of like
like predators.
They look like predators mixed with kind of like a D&D Fey folk, like kind of that kind of Pan's Labyrinth. Type of looking with the kind of the antler type of thing going backwards.
Yep.
That's interesting. Wow. They were barely similar to us, and they're only bipedal. That's kind of the only thing that's in common.
They're humanoid, sentient, obviously all the good stuff, but yeah, short of that, there was not too much known about their anatomy or history, whether or not because it wasn't written about or discovered, because they did eventually disappear, the Tongs as a species.
And is this appearance of them, is that still canon to this day?
As far as I know, yeah.
Cool.
It seems like most anything that's BBY, for the most part, is still
has retained
canonical.
Its original value. Wow.
Yeah, that's all the stuff from Coder and stuff like that. That's all canon still. I guess there was some hiccup mashup about where the Jedi and the Sith originated from, but nobody talks about that because those books didn't last.
They're really cool.
So there's this big gap in history from when they were kicked off the planet Coruscant and Neutron. 25,000 and 7,000 BBY. They're on a planet called Rune. No real importance. I think I have it in the map here. So this right here. Oh, you can't see, but you see that dot that tips off the triangle at the end there?
At the very top?
At the very bottom.
Oh,
so
yeah.
The where they mix.
Yes, the bottom right corner.
Mm-hmm. That is. I wonder if I can zoom in more.
Their second planet.
Yeah, that's their first home planet, Rune. Still on the outer rim, but that's where they started in Coruscant. Actually, let me point it out for you. This is my first time using PowerPoint. I was using slides, and it was a lot easier to do this stuff. This is where they started in Coruscant, in the core. Something happened between however many years it was, the 12,000 years. They ended up here and settled on Rune. And then eventually, 7,000 BBY, they discover and conquer the Mandalore planet and its surrounding systems.
So Mandalore 1.0 was never called Mandalore.
Who knows what the name was.
Right.
But they came, conquered, named it Mandalore. I cannot recall exactly what Mandalore means in terms of the planet name.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that's where they've been ever since. Huh?
This is the last.
A couple other things.
You can't. Here's the thing that Tyler always does. He slides these really funny lines in the PowerPoint, and I just sound like an idiot bursting out laughing out of nowhere because I'm just reading them. God damn it.
So at that point, once they conquer planet Mandalore, they establish the first ruler called the Mandalore. They literally call him Mandalore the First. Between 7,000 and 4,000 BBY, so about 3,000 years, they just begin taking over all sorts of planets that are within their sector, and they get to the point where they actually call it Mandalore space. So one of their very first conquerors, there's that little moon that we talked about before, the moon of Conquer Dawn. Then they go over and there's a couple other planets within the stratosphere that they conquer as well. So they have not nearly as big as Hutt space, but they do have this nice section of the galaxy to themselves. Still outer rim, but actually not too far away from where everything's going on. Pretty interesting. Between this time too, I think it was just before 4,000 BBY, they invaded this planet called Mandalia, and they came across this species called the Mandalorian giants. These are these guys right here. These were the first species that the Mandalorians could not beat in combat. So they obviously gained their respect, and actually what ended up happening was they had this sort of agreement where the giants went and like kind of fought for the Mandalorians, and they were the first non-Tong species to be incorporated into the Mandalorian culture. Very, very cool. About 4,000 BBY, they do further expansion crusades. They go outside of their known and established regions of space up until the Great Sith War, which Christian and I talked about many months ago. Christian, do you recall anything about the Great Sith War?
Oof. So the Great Sith War, from my remembrance, was a fucking clusterfuck. So in shorthand, probably not. In long form, I do remember certain instances of the use of the corridors of, subspace and all that stuff, but no.
Okay.
I won't sit here and try to blather on when I'd rather you just explain it more properly. Yeah.
Sure. So the Great Sith War, pretty straightforward conflict. Only lasted 4 years. It was the Sith versus the Jedi. It started with the Krath Empire in the Inner Core. With the Inner Core, the Krath Empire, which was actually Sith in nature, they attempted to invade the Republic. Then the Mandalorians got involved simply because a Jedi that went undercover, a Jedi named Ula Keldroma, he was swayed by the dark side of the Force, became a Sith himself under Exar Kun. Ula Keldroma reached out to the Mandalorians and said, hey, if I beat your Mandalore in single combat, you guys will have to fight for me. And he beat the Mandalore, and then the Mandalorians came under Sith rule. They fought a little bit. The most important thing, because we're going to keep this very focused on the Mandalorians, the most important thing for this was that the Mandalorians gained Basilisk war droids, which you can see them in that bottom right corner. These monstrosities.
I literally died.
Huh?
You're freaking captain. I literally die.
Yeah, his name is Mandalore the Indomitable, and all he does the entire time is just get dominated. So, right up here, this is the first iteration of armor that is made well known to the galaxy for the Mandalorians. That is...
wow, it looks a lot like Predator armor.
Mm-hmm. Yep. At this point, the Tongs still exist as a species, but at this point, as well as we already mentioned, the Mandalorians had incorporated many other species into their ranks. So they, to distinguish themselves, because they had all these different cultures now and races, they developed the armor that we know and love to this day and age, but it started here. This is the first generation.
Did the giants of Manila still up here?
There wasn't too much talk of them like that. That wasn't so much.
Filipino Manila giants.
Manila giants. I'm sure that's offending somebody somewhere.
I am Filipino.
Are you offended?
Yes.
Okay, good. So, no, as far as I've talked about, those giants were not specified. What was more important with that was that's where the turning point came for Mandalorian culture to accept non-Mandalorian species into their culture. That was the key takeaway there. Not so much that the giants were there, because the giants were crazy. I don't know why they didn't show up any further. But yeah, most important takeaway was Mandalorians, they gained Basilisk war droids. They got their asses handed to them. They lost their leader. And then after this war, they kind of disband. They head back to Mandalore, and they're quiet for a couple of years. Up until about 20 years later, we have the Mandalorian Wars, titled as such. It's a 16-year conflict, but it's kind of interesting because even though it was 16 years, the fighting for it only happened in the last 5 years. the first 10 years, all the Mandalorians were doing was they were making just a bunch of advances into this section. So this big yellow swath, this is what the Mandalorians were doing for the first 10 years of the conflict. They were just capturing all these Outer Rim territories. So nobody in the Republic gave two shits about what was going on. What they were actually doing was the Mandalorians did have intentions of invading the core and invading the Republic, but they wanted to stay under the radar. So they wanted to capture, stockpile weapons, gain other species. They're prepping for war while these guys are just sitting on their asses not thinking about it. So they didn't really get into conflict with the Republic until 3965 BBY, and even then, it wasn't even serious conflict. They had a little
Which
bit of
is 11 years into the war?
Pretty much, yeah. War.
Okay.
For them, they were warring all this section of the galaxy. They were even coming up against Hutt space, which is the problem because they didn't give a shit that the Hutts were the Hutts. They're like, we're going to take this.
Which is kind of saying something, honestly.
Yeah. They're like, go ahead.
Because everyone gives a shit that the Hutts are the Hutts.
Yeah, exactly. They've had this section of space for literally since recorded history.
Since literally the first blot of ink on the...
This right here, this little area right here, this is where the war, it could be said that the war actually started. So you're all familiar with the planet Taurus, anybody who's played Coder games. This is the first planet you're on in the first Coder game. Mandalorians didn't outright invade it. What they tried to do was they tried to take over these three little wars right here, Jebel, Volta, and there's another one that they don't name. They tried to take over these planets because these three planets were supplying Taurus with all the goods. So they're trying to take away their supplies. As soon as this happened, the Republic stepped in. They created a huge blockade from this planet right here, Telarath, all the way to Jebel. So it was this massive corridor of ships, and they basically blockaded that whole section of space from the Mandalorians. So what happened was the Mandalorians pulled back, and everything was kind of quiet for about 8 months. They really weren't doing anything. But one important thing was, for Taurus, there was a little section of Jedi that were there, and they dipped for whatever reason. And that was the signal that the Mandalorians took, like, okay, let's invade. As soon as the Jedi left the area, now we're going to push the offensive. They didn't wipe out this blockade, but they broke it apart. So then the Republic blockade broke apart, went to different sections of the galaxy. At this point, the Mandalorians, they set up 3 different corridors for invasion, 3 routes that they were going to take to accomplish different things. The third route was the most important. They were setting up, I believe, to attack Alderaan. But that was supposedly like one of the most important points. They weren't attacking Alderaan directly. They were setting up on a planet right next to Alderaan to prepare to invade.
So for the people that are tuning in that don't have the visual aid, where did you acquire this map for them to check out?
You can get this map online. You literally search Mandalorian Wars and type in map, and it shows up. However, if you buy Star Wars: The Essential Atlas, not sponsored.
Not sponsored.
By Daniel Wallace and Jason Fry, both very good chroniclers of anything Star Wars in terms of the reference book. They make some of the most in-depth ones. But the Essential Atlas, I believe they just revamped the Atlas to include all the new planets, like Navarro and things like that from the Mandalorian.
Oh, very nice.
But they're still really good reference points, especially for anything that you want to talk about that happened, we'll say 1000 BBY onwards, or backwards.
And it is officially licensed, as I see.
Yeah, there's a nice Disney logo slapped on the back. So I mean, if that's not canon, don't put your name on it.
Fair enough.
So the Mandalorian War gets into full fruition, we'll say. This is when they attacked the core worlds, attacked the Republic fully. This is finally when the Republic's like, well, shit, now we're in war. Okay, fine.
Yeah, wasn't this a bit of a surprise, if I remember correctly?
Yes and no. I don't want to say surprise, but it was more like the Republic should have been more ready. Because they weren't taking the Mandalorians seriously. Because you have to understand, like we talked about first.
So it wasn't that they didn't know about it. It's just that they were looking out the window and didn't realize how close they were until they were on the window pane.
No, so like the Mandalorians take over all this area of the galaxy. Of course, who gives a shit? It's in the Outer Rim. It's not the Republic. We don't really care, right? They even get so far as they push up right against right here. This was a very hot point for much of the war. They spent 2 years just in this, even though 8 months of it they weren't fighting. But this is when the Republic's like, oh shit, maybe we should start taking them seriously as a threat, which was a little bit too late. At that point, the Mandalorians did some pretty terrible things. They attacked the world of Cathar, eradicated about 90% of the Catharian species. That was a very bad thing. We're getting into why that planet was so important for the fulfillment of the war. They attacked Zabrak. Or the homeworld, the Zabrak homeworld of Eridonia. They conquered that. They captured Jebel, which I think is up there. Oh yeah, Jebel was the staging point to attack Alderaan. I knew that was in there somewhere.
It's easy to get lost in a literal galaxy.
Yeah. Yeah, I knew it. Another couple things they had done, which were pretty bad, short of wiping out the Cathar species, they bombed the planet Sirocco. Sirocco was a pretty neutral territory. It was part of the Republic, but they weren't really doing anything. And what happened was the Republic knew that they were going to attack, so they set up a blockade, right, with their ships around the planet, and then they host these civilian camps outside of their cities because they're like, oh, they're going to target the cities. Those are important points. So they're like, oh, but they're not going to bomb the cities if we have the civilians right outside the cities, kind of thing. They thought the Mandalorians were going to have some sort of honor. The Mandalore at the time, Mandalore the Ultimate, he's like, that's kind of bullshit, you know. Like, so what he did was they brought the Mandalorian fleet right near the Republic fleet. They sent out all these nuclear missiles. Instead of targeting the ships, they still bombed the fucking planet. Destroyed, I think it was 20 or 30 civilian centers. They wiped out a ton of the cities, wiped out a ton of the civilian camps. Basically, they just left that as a lesson to the Republic. Say, fuck around, find out. Like, don't play those fucking games with us, man.
In Stellaris terms, they unlocked full orbital bombardment.
Yeah, it was pretty bad. At that point, the Republic, they pulled out because they just weren't expecting something like that to happen. And at that point, they still weren't figuring out what was going on because they spent the last 4 years basically just getting their ass handed to them. Up until, do you have any idea what Jedi showed up in this conflict?
This wasn't Exar Kun, was it?
This happened after him.
I'm afraid I...
Jedi hero. Popped up out of nowhere. Basically went against the Jedi Council because the Republic was in this war, but the Jedi were not. They were purposely staying out of the conflict. There were a couple other Jedis that were like, no, we should be fighting, we should be helping. But this one Jedi in particular took a bunch of Jedi with him to fight. He did have an apprentice.
He didn't have an apprentice?
He did have an apprentice.
Oh, he did have an apprentice. Nice.
Yeah, I did.
So here's the thing, and what our audience needs to understand is that when we were in high school together, I loved history. I was a great history buff. I could tell you each and everything about any of their the presidents' like lifestyles, how they died, all that stuff. But I could never remember names, and which is why I did poorly in history. It's the same thing, just repeated right now. I do not remember names very easily.
It's so funny because you know this guy. So
I know this guy probably almost like the back of my hand, but I cannot remember the name.
He wore a Mandalorian mask sometimes. It's gonna be the last thing I can give you. I can't think of anything else that's not gonna give it away.
Just save me the save me the embarrassment, my friend.
Right.
On my own podcast.
What am I doing here?
Brutality.
Revan.
God damn it. God fucking damn it.
Revan shows up onto the scene. He was there before.
I was literally just thinking, I'm like, I wonder when Revan goes.
Yeah, this is when he comes in.
Right. God damn it.
Just before Revan, there was another Jedi who nobody's really gonna know the name of. His name is Dojander Case. Originally he was against the Jedi interfering.
I literally
in the war.
sent you a Revan cosplay for when I went to
Did you?
Kineticon, yeah.
I think you did, yeah.
Yeah, so there was someone dressed up as Darth Revan in
Fantastic.
in the
But at this point, he's Jedi Revan. Apparently that's not even his real name. Nobody knows what his real name is. There was also another Jedi during this conflict as well, Jorjander Case. He was a member of the Jedi Council. He was also very much against Jedi involvement in the war, but something changed in him, and he ended up stepping down from the Jedi Council. I think he even stepped down from the Jedi Order as well, and joined the side of the Mandalorians. He was trying to basically get them to change their ways from the inside out. Didn't quite work out. That's them right there. The Jedi that followed him,
it's a tall task, to be fair.
Yeah. The Jedi that joined him became Mandalorian Knights. This was one of the first instances of lightsaber-wielding Mandalorian armored people. About a year later, we'll say 3,962, 61-ish, Revan shows up on the scene. At this point, he has full support of the Republic. The Jedi with Revan visit the planet of Cathar, which we had known was just like 90% of that population was just exterminated. This is where they have this joint force vision that shows the massacre, and which basically all the Jedi and Revan are like, no, we're fighting this battle. It only took about a year for them to beat the Mandalorians back to Malachor 5, which we all know ended in fucking disaster. But there's a couple key takeaways from this war that affect the Mandalorian people directly. They lost all of the territory they had conquered short of the original territory they had in Mandalorian space, so planet Mandalore conquered Dawn, I think a couple other planets within that sector. That's all they had left.
So they basically passed go and returned back to the first property.
Yeah. Yep. Exactly. Yeah, they sold all their property. Starting over again.
Yep.
They were told to destroy all their basilisk droids. Most of them followed.
Also, that's why we don't see them anymore.
No. There's a few people that held on to it, did not listen to that was specifically from Revan. He sanctioned them to destroy all of these weapons.
Right.
Most of them did, some of them didn't. He also took the Mask of Mandalore. So most people nowadays, they know the Darksaber. That's sort of like the focal point for whoever holds the Darksaber leads the Mandalorian people.
Right. The relic.
Prior to the Darksaber being in canonical existence, there was this thing called the Mask of Mandalore. Yeah, so this guy, he has it right there. The Mask of Mandalore, I didn't do too much research into it, but it originated with the Tong species. It was crafted from the hip bone or the sternum bone of one of those mythosaur creatures.
Mythosaur, yeah, that's right.
So super tough. Basically, whoever wore the mask was the Mandalore. It seemed almost like you could kind of claim it. However, obviously through single combat, but you could also, if you came across it, you could designate yourself as Mandalorian. People will follow your rule, so to speak. When this war happened, when the Mandalorian War ended, Revan took the mask and hid it somewhere. So the Mandalorian people could not come back to, like, all the separate clans could not reunite because they didn't have any focal leader. Nobody would, be recognized as leader of Mandalore without that mask.
Yeah, be permanently disjointed.
Exactly.
Each other, yeah.
That was like the key thing. It never brought back the Mandalorian people. So they scattered. They had no Mandalore, but some familiar characters popped back up afterwards. This is right after the Mandalorian War and right after the events of the Coder game. Revan contacts Canderous Ordo, who we know from the Coder games. He needed to have the Mandalorian people reunite, and essentially he wanted them to be prepared to help defend the galaxy against the hidden Sith Empire. So he contacts Canderous Ordo. He shows him where the mask is, and he says, "You have to be the new Mandalore." So Canderous Ordo becomes Mandalore the Preserver, and he spends the next 20 or so years attempting to reunite the clans. He was not fully successful. It took about 300 years for them to come back together for, yep, you guessed it, another fucking war. So 3,661 BBY, we have the Great Galactic War. This is the hidden Sith Empire, comes out of nowhere, attacks the Republic. This is the Coder MMORPG. This follows that war. At the very beginning of or right before we should say the actual conflict starts, the hidden Sith Empire basically creates this fake Mandalore, or they create this guy who's going to be the Mandalore for them. In Geonosis, they had the fighting pits, and they made sure that this one particular person would keep winning the fights.
They rigged the cards.
They created this guy, and then all the Mandalorian people fell in from around the galaxy to follow this new Mandalore. And then when the Sith invaded, what's that?
The Mandalorians did the old flip-flop suck cock. Pause.
So when the fighting actually starts between the Sith and the Republic, the Mandalorians are on the side of the Sith fighting the Republic and the Jedi. However, Mandalorians, a lot of them have a change of heart. There are a few in particular that's decided we cannot keep doing this. We need to support the Republic. They kill the fake Mandalore, and then they go through their subsequent changes. For the most part, they're still a little bit of an ally to the Sith, but they're not fighting the Republic nearly as intensely. And then it got to the point where they just straight up switched sides and were just fighting the Sith with the Republic. After that war finally ends, things do quiet down. You don't really hear about the Mandalorians too much throughout galactic history. It's assumed that they were spending this time trying to rebuild. At one point, there was a massive plague that devastated the Mandalorian people, part of what also devastated the planet as well. They had to kind of move all over the place. And then there were the new Sith Wars in 1004 to 1000 BBY. As soon as that conflict started, the Mandalorians were completely 100% against the Sith. They're like, nope, not dealing with this again. This is all.
So now we're about as close as 1 millennia away from the events of the Mandalorian series.
Yep. So right around this point, 1000 BBY, we have a lot of important things going on in the galaxy. We have the destruction of the Sith, as fully as we believe, even though there's Darth Bane who creates the rule of two.
This is the except for millennia.
Yep.
Forehead.
Except you're fucking wrong, forehead. Yeah, so we have Bane. You have the Ruusan Reformations, which completely reformed galactic and republic law and all sorts of other shit. And it was also an important time for the Mandalorians as well. I would say for the first 200-300 years after the Ruusan Reformations, they were still trying to do their thing. They were, being this militaristic order. However, they got to the point. Yeah, go ahead.
By the way, this might have been covered already, but I just want to kind of, concrete the concept in my mind.
Sure.
So when the armor discusses, because there's only a few moments within the Mandalore series, even after 3 seasons, where they talk in depth about the events of the past. She mentions at one point that the Mandalorians had fought with the Jedi.
Mhm.
Have we gone over that yet?
Well, there was a couple of different instances where they did fight with the Jedi.
Because so far they fought with the Sith a lot. But with the
Like
Jedi.
fighting against the Jedi?
Yeah.
They fought against the Jedi in the Great Sith War. That was one of the first instances of them fighting Jedi. Yeah, it literally started.
Oh, that's right, because the inner core would have been Jedi. Yes.
Yep. Well, and then it also started with. Well, he wasn't actually a Jedi, so that doesn't super count. But yeah, this is where they were first, open warfare between Mandalorians and Jedi. The Mandalorian War, especially near the end, they were fighting Jedi. Great Galactic War, of course, they were fighting Force wielders on both sides of the conflict. They were fighting against the Jedi, and they were fighting against the Sith.
So she could have been kind of referring to just the general past of their people.
Yeah, there's a lot of instances. The more recent ones which possibly could have been, and this may have been where the originations of the Children of the Watch came from, which is the order that Din Djarin's from.
Right.
I have not.
The cult as
I have not gone into this too much. There's some theories, but the information, the canonical points, could be drawn. I didn't spend enough time looking at that specifically.
Yeah, it's predominantly still not revealed.
I don't even know if it's not revealed, or I just didn't take the time to actually find out if there was actually a link there. I do have some theorized links, short of not actually doing research into this, which we're going to talk about.
Okay.
Because this part right here, we have 1000 BBY, the Ruusan Reformations, the whole galaxy's changed, there's no more Sith. The first 200 years after that, the Mandalorians are still up to their games. They're still being warriors, they're still fighting. There was actually they had a massive arms buildup for whatever reason, to the point where the Republic was like, we got to be preemptive about this time. So they basically tried to send a cease and desist order. But they didn't listen. So what they ended up doing was they just bombed the fucking planet of Mandalore. This is what's that?
It's just the idea of it. It's just it's at the beginning there's a wrecking ball, and you don't notice the wrecking ball because you're there's no way it's ever gonna hit my house, and then the wrecking ball just comes and it just smashes the house.
Yeah.
And then a few thousand years later you see someone building a wrecking ball and you're like, hey.
I know where this goes. I know where this leads.
I know what happens.
Stop it. So that's exactly what happened here. The entire surface of Mandalore was bombed, which created all those white sand deserts. It didn't make the planet completely inhabitable, but at this point, right after this, there was a massive rise through most of the Mandalorian society, who decided that there needed to be a change. So this is where we get the term, quote unquote, the new Mandalores. They cast away all ideas of warfare. They didn't really follow anything in terms of building armor. Armor basically disappeared from the galaxy. They shut down pretty much all production of that sort of shit. They weren't really mercenaries, short of the individual people across the galaxy you come across. However, this was, I would say, the majority of Mandalorian society became these new Mandalores who followed peace, neutrality, all that shit. But there was still another, almost not even a counterculture, but there was a subsect of them. I can't remember if I wrote down the name. I didn't write down the name, but they were people that basically still follow the old ways. So they still made armor, they were still warriors, but they weren't warmongers or anything like that. They're no, our people were built out of warfare, so we need to continue to follow the traditions.
The big change of ideology amongst the society wasn't kind of reinforced and mandated. There were still others that just wanted to practice stuff on their own.
Basically, yeah, they still followed the traditions of armor making. They still followed traditions of fighting and warfare. They even actually still established Mandalores, their own rulers, because the leader of the new Mandalores was not called Mandalore, but the subsect still continued to have a Mandalore, the sole ruler who they would follow and was their leader, so to speak.
So essentially, as a parallel, the Children of the Watch are more akin to the old ways than they are to present-day Mandalorian society.
Well, present-day Mandalorian society, even then, you're talking about the peaceful, neutral people, they don't even exist anymore at that point.
Oh, so it was kind of it was a fad.
it was not going to work. I don't know.
Right.
It was so stupid to me when I'm reading about it. It's this is so fucking dumb. You're not going to trash 30,000 years of warfare history and all of a sudden you're just going to be peaceful again. That's not how that works. But so the clans that were part of this subsect that wanted to continue the traditions of Mandalorian culture, they themselves were split into different sects. So you have one sect, and this really only came into prominence around 60 BBY, so a number of decades before the movies.
So like it's not even, it's barely a generational gap.
Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it can almost be said that there are some people within the universe in ABY that knew about this shit. That was going on, possibly.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So in 60 BBY, we got a couple of interesting characters. Obviously, we still have the new Mandalorians. They're just doing their thing, being peaceful. That's fine. There's a man named Jaster Muriel who took the title of Mandalore, and he decided we're gonna still be warriors, but he's like, let's be good warriors, so to speak. He's like, basically, he wanted them to treat him like very highly paid, respected mercenaries. He said this is one of the best ways we're gonna rebuild this warrior culture back up. And then at the same time, he rewrote this whole structure, codex, basically, for the Mandalorians. He called it the Super Commando Codex. He said anybody who wants to be a true Mandalorian will follow this codex.
Be like paragons of virtue. Conflict.
Yeah, the honor, all that sorts of stuff. Okay. Good shit. He was actually, I believe he was the adoptive father of Jango Fett.
Yeah.
Which is very
I had
important.
no idea Jango Fett even had a father.
Well, like, adopted.
Yeah.
Not as, like, real father.
But still, like, any kind of father figure whatsoever.
Yeah, he did. Well, a lot of them do. But, you know, it follows the same cycle where they're not in their life for that long.
Yeah, they're also kind of like, I feel like they're more akin to stray animals. Like, they might hang out with, like, a group for a bit, but then they'll dip for however many years to do their own thing.
So this is Jaster Muriel, and this is the scene of him getting completely fucked. So which doesn't last too long.
Is this from like a comics series?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yep. So you have the new Mandalorians, the peaceful guys. You have the true Mandalorians, the honorable warrior type. And then there's another subsect that broke, also part of this original subsect that was still following Mandalorian culture. Initially, when they got started, they were not called anything, but they were like, no, we are warriors, but we're also warmongers, and we're primal, and we want to instigate another galactic conflict. Very
like extremists.
Yeah, very extreme. Of course, they're going to come into conflict with the true Mandalorians, so between 60 BBY and I'm not sure how much longer, but there was actually another Mandalorian Civil War, but only contained to Mandalore, and conquered Dar and a couple other.
Which is still significant. A planet Civil War is still pretty big.
But there also was not a ton of people on either side of the conflict.
Right.
So you're talking maybe a few thousand people, if that. The resulting sect that came out of the Zealots was Death Watch. Death Watch was like, the same as the true Mandalorians, but completely on the other side of like wanting to be full warmongers. And this is where I'm starting to find some links between the Children of the Watch. Because they did follow a lot of the code of the Mandalorian culture. But specifically Din Djarin, he was actually taken away and he was raised by people of Death Watch. So it seemed like at the time when he got into it, that Children of the Watch was already a thing, maybe not named as such, because even Death Watch, but they were still like taking their helmets off and stuff like that. So it seems like at some point there was this even more, not extremist, but even more
isolated.
Even more isolated group that came out of Death Watch. That's more theory than anything else, simply because of like what was shown and what was talked about.
Right.
Because there's nothing else that places them as like all of a sudden, also you had the Children of the Watch. It could also explain simply because of that and his culture how he didn't know a lot that was going on, because Death Watch and the true Mandalorians, they were not actually on the planet Mandalore at the time of like the Clone Wars. They were on the Conquered Dawn. They were on a different moon. They were allowed to coexist with the new Mandalorians, but they didn't interact like on the same planet or anything like that. So that could also be another reason, because they were so isolated, they didn't know of other events going on.
Yeah, and this is, for those listening, this is kind of like a Star Wars, an OG Star Wars kind of knowledge base, trying to tie the links between new school Star Wars. So
yeah, but
we might not be fully right on everything, but we're doing our best to give you guys the nice scoop.
Well, there are a lot of interesting things that go on during this time. You obviously have the death of Jango's adopted father, but this is also where Jango starts to get his name as being like a super badass. He goes through some shit on his own, but this eventually...
Wasn't he like the #1 bounty hunter in the galaxy?
Well, before he was that, this is where he was. So he was actually involved. He was basically, once his dad died, he was in line to take over as Mandalore, and he was the one who was going to bring his people back up. What ended up happening was you had the incident on Galadriel, where there were 20 Jedi that were sent to cease and desist these Mandalorians. And you want to know who led that Jedi group? Dooku.
Oh.
So Dooku brought 20 Jedi with him, and this is where Jango Fett gets his name as such a badass, because he killed 7 Jedi with his bare fucking hands during that fight. He lost both his weapons, and he saw somebody else dead, like I think his like second in command, like best friend, and he just goes off.
Yeah.
He's still lost.
That would be an amazing scene to watch.
Yeah, he's still lost, but he didn't walk away with
That's why
nothing.
Django was the GOAT.
Yeah. The new Mandalorian way of life, I think, was really stupid. I think it was just like an overcorrection almost. It's like, I think the true Mandalorians, they had the best way where it's like, instead of like completely destroying the Mandalorian, the warrior culture, we should just restructure it to be more benevolent almost, or be more honorable, because the last 3,000 years, you didn't really see a lot of like honorable acts coming out of the Mandalorian, which is kind of weird considering how highly their culture prize that sort of thing in combat.
It's also, I feel like it would be a gross underestimation of the rest of the galaxy, because for us to be like, all right, well, we've beaten the shit out of a lot of people, but now we're peaceful, now we're gonna lay down all our arms. It's like, well, you made a lot of enemies when you're beating the shit out of a lot of people, so you at least have a minimal like amount of protection
but
for
they didn't do
yourself.
any of that. And I really disliked the whole Duchess Satine arc. It just didn't make sense to me. But you wanted to talk about, you were mentioning before where like Bo-Katan and all them came from. She was actually part of Death Watch, so she was technically a bad guy during the Clone Wars. So that's the reason why they have all that. And yes, they followed that whole thing with like the Darksaber bullshit.
So in the new Mandalorian series, where are the peaceful ones?
Oh, the peaceful ones are on Mandalore, the planet Mandalore.
Which is where they were when in the third season.
Oh, sorry, in the Mandalore. Oh, so sorry, I misunderstood your question. In the Mandalorian show,
right?
It seemed like at that point there was a complete dissolution. Did you ever? You never finished watching the Clone Wars, did you?
Finish watching the Clone Wars?
Did you watch?
I never watched the last season or whatever. Yeah, no.
So they talked a little bit about that, but then they went into like the fall of it in the 7th season. They revamped that final season. You gotta watch that show. They based the last 4
I gotta
episodes.
watch that. I gotta watch Rebels. I'm a bit far behind.
The last 4 episodes of the newest Clone Wars season goes into that, the fall of the new Mandalore. So they spoil it for you, they don't really exist past the Clone Wars. They didn't make it out of the Clone Wars.
Right.
Which made sense. I never really thought, me personally, I don't think they should have fucking existed to begin with, but that's just me. It just didn't make sense.
That goes into a little bit of the theories and opinions. I know we'll probably go into it, but like, do you think that if Django would have taken up the reins of the Mandalore, that he would have been able to reunite his people?
I don't think Django could have. Django as a person was an isolist.
And too independent. Yeah.
He is a solo guy.
He was the definition of a lone wolf.
I think everyone just like pushed him as the guy because he was the original Mandalore's like son and protege. And also because he was, I would say at that time, the toughest fucking Mandalorian of anybody.
Well, the toughest bounty hunter. I think you mentioned in your own words that he was number 1 and Cad Bane like barely number 2, but he was like number 1 bounty hunter in the galaxy.
He was, absolutely. When he made a name for himself, which happened because he split from the Mandalorian culture. He still wore the armor, but at that point he wasn't really super affiliated with Mandalorians. He was top bounty hunter in the world. So no, I can't see him as the guy. Interestingly enough, his son Boba later on became Mandalore. And when you look at Boba, even how they portrayed him in the Book of Boba show, it would have made sense for him, Boba, to become a Mandalore before Django.
I don't know if this is more theory than anything else, but I feel like with Django, if he were more of a family guy, then he would have settled down with all the money he'd made and all that stuff. But no, he wanted to have a clone kid so he could keep moving on and
he wanted a legacy.
Yeah,
he wanted a legacy.
So it's understandable.
I mean, that was a big thing with all of Mandalorian culture, especially not necessarily the new Mandalorians, but the true Mandalorians, the original warrior Mandalorians. The big thing was legacy. Who you're gonna leave your stuff to.
Yeah. I mean, this might seem like a dumb question, but how did Django end up in the employ of Dooku to begin with?
So there's a game, I think it's a PlayStation exclusive, that followed his story particularly just before he got hooked up with Tyrannus. So I couldn't be certain, but I think he was actually employed by Tyrannus without knowing it. Like somebody else contracted him out on Tyrannus' behalf, almost like a test. And at that point, he had actually was introduced to Tyrannus, and he says, I have a job for you unlike anything you've ever done before.
Right.
Sort of thing. That's how he got hooked up with Dooku. I don't really think he knew him outside of any job. I think he'd only been hired as a job, as more of a test job for Django to determine whether or not he could be the person they wanted him to be, which was the progenitor of the clone army.
Cool.
And it was also pretty interesting because he got hooked up obviously with Tyrannus, the Kaminoans, and then he brought with him about 100 Mandalorians. They're called like the Kolbadar. He said, he looks at me and goes, you know, you guys are dead to the galaxy. You got families? No. You guys are going to be on Kamino for the next 10 years training the clone commandos, which is what they did. So he brought in, and there's I have a whole series of books that just go into like how the Mandalorian culture affected the clone troopers, especially like the first generations.
Really, it is crazy how, although he's not given that much credit for the casual fan, Jango was probably one of the most, if not the most important human being in the galaxy.
He was, yeah.
In terms of like,
he was the point
in terms of how everything happened, you know, things played out.
Yeah, he was a big influencer. Not so much actually an influencer of where the Mandalorians went after 60 BBY, but definitely with his own influence on the galaxy. And then yeah, of course, the creation and the
development of the clone army.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's a simple man just trying to make his way in the galaxy. So, like I said, you talked about the armor, so I want to get into that. So you have the Mandalorian armor, also called Beskar. Well, sorry, not called Beskar. It's called Beskar Gan, which literally translates to iron skin. The armor came about mostly because they wanted a way for the Mandalorians to be able to distinguish themselves from everybody else in the galaxy, especially if you take off the helmet, all of a sudden you're looking at a human and you're Erdonian.
You're looking at Bob.
Yeah, you're looking at all these different
accounting.
cultures, so you can't look at like 10 different species and be like, oh yeah, they're Mandalorian, but there's one thing that unifies us. We all have the same looking armor. Utilized by almost all factions, clans of the Mandalorian people. You have the two purposes, obviously defense and the identification. Fun fact is Mandalorian armor could be made out of a lot of different materials, especially during the Clone Wars. They fashioned it out of a lot of different materials. So you have like, you know, Durasteel. Yes, Beskar armor. Alum, that was another thing they made the armors out. Obviously not as good as Beskar. Beskar was like...
Alum is in the planet?
Sorry, Alum. Not Ilum. But obviously Beskar is going to be top tier, highest grade. Those are the ones that can... I mean, a lot of them that can deflect blaster bolts, but Beskar was the only one that could also deflect lightsaber blows and shit like that.
It's incredible how Beskar can be used in the hands of its ancestral owners.
Proof of extermination will be accepted for a lower fee.
I would like to eat the baby.
It went through a couple different design changes, but regardless of what generation or what iteration it was looking at, there were 3 features that were pretty much the same no matter what generation you're pulling armor from. You had the T-shaped visor, which influenced, obviously, Clone Trooper armor, influenced Royal Guard armor, and you take your pick. It protected the user from most blaster fire, that was inherent on most models, and also the customization of the armor, whether it be for personal preference or for actual utilization. Those were the 3 defining factors that were, you know, you could pull a Gen 1 from 7000 BBY, it would have those functions, versus one, you know, Din Djarin's had the same functions. Around 3000 BBY is when we saw a very, very big change. As I talked about with Christian, this is what the armor initially looked like. This was the very first armor that sort of everybody saw as, oh boy, that's a Mandalorian, holy shit. It looked like this up until around, you know, we'll say 4,000 to 3,000 BBY. This was...
You know what's kind of ironic is the fact that the center Mandalorian there, which is clearly, you know, obviously an ancient design, it more resembles the Emperor's Royal Guards than it does the modern Mandalorians, which is kind of interesting.
Mm-hmm.
It kind of went full circle, but for a different order.
Well, this armor design was actually very, very distinct than all the other ones, because obviously you have the first ones, but then especially when they had the Mandalorian Wars going on, then you had the Sith Wars, the Jedi Civil War, they utilized this armor specifically. I believe that was like the Neo Crusader armor or Shock Trooper armor. They developed that armor to actually encapsulate a lot of different species, and not just that, but this was also the most unified look. So even like this one, even the one on the right side, even that one could be customized, so you'd see different variations, different designs, but it did look similar. Versus the one in the middle, they almost all looked the same. It was like Clone Trooper armor, basically. This uniform. That was the important part about that. And then a little bit after that, we have the new design, or the most current design that we see, which is with these other 2, it was full body armor, as you can see for the most part, versus the one at the end. And then obviously the ones we see from like Jango and Boba. instead of being one full bodysuit of armor, it was different plates of armor.
Yeah.
Most of the protection was on the body's vital points, but then in between was a waterproof armor weave suit, but it wasn't full protection. This design also allowed the most amount of customization you've ever seen in terms of like design and also weapon utilization. They switched from having it full defensive armor to more mobility, and this also allowed them to be more offensive. So they realized how important it was to have not just your pistols and your weapons, but weapons built into the armor that they
also
changed
had
here.
that kind of functionality.
Yep,
'Cause
functionality.
they were always kind of more of a, I would say, guerrilla warfare versus like kind of like the everybody in formation. They weren't like clones.
No, they weren't. They weren't.
It was like even if you watch the Mandalorian like films, like they're all like on jetpacks, flying kicks, and all that kind of acrobatic type of stuff. They don't, they're not very rigid. The only people that are rigid are the ones with more armor, like Paz Vizsla when he's more rooted with those big guns.
Yeah. So the change in the warfare and not necessarily the culture, but mostly the change in warfare changed the armor. So short of those functional designs, you also have actual like aesthetic designs as well. A lot of people would use it to like signify where your clan is from, cultural inheritance, personal achievements that you've made. I've killed this many so and so. Even Din Djarin, Children of the Watch, they do that as different things to signify
when
the
he
clan.
killed like the mud rhino or whatever.
Yeah, the mudhorn. He's got the mudhorn on his thing and sorts of shit like that. But even so far as the color that you see on certain armor, I mean, you can have just a color just because my armor's green because I like green. That's fine too. But in Mandalorian, the colors could actually mean something.
That's the only thing. I mean, this is just me. This is the heavy part of the opinion side of our podcast. But I hate. That's the one thing I didn't like about the Children of the Watch. They look like a bunch of different Skittles.
Yeah, I know. It's so dumb. All this
Like,
disjointed.
At least have some kind of like, I don't know.
Why do you have a green helmet with yellow fucking? There's no coordination whatsoever.
It's like a freaking middle schooler trying to go to school with like different colored Skechers and you're like,
I know what you mean.
come on, man.
There's no more uniform. Everything prior to the Mandalorian show, it was all. Didn't matter where you came from. If you're Mandalorian, you had a same color coding system going on.
And even Bo-Katan, like they had that individualism with like the owl and all that stuff.
Yeah, she was part of the Night Owl.
But that looks cooler than like just having a bunch of like Skechers style like.
I know.
Like, come on, man.
Even that adds to the confusion of where the Children of the Watch came from. Because Death Watch, by the time Death Watch was an actual thing, they were all uniform, had the same look. No matter what, at that point...
I think that's just an aesthetic choice of mine, but at the same time, I'm like, come on.
Yeah. It just looks so dumb.
And like, it's so... I mean, especially because like, it's so cool to see how they came back to like a different planet.
Mm-hmm.
And then you go out and you like look at them and you're like, oh, yeah. These are who we...
They look like a bunch of goobers.
These are...
Yeah. This is more important, the coloring of the armor, in terms of having it meaning. This comes more into play into a lot of the books and stories that go very far into the Mandalorian culture. You see a lot of the main characters, they do have armor, and they will actually paint their armor to signify part like a personal quest that they're on.
Oh, cool.
In one of the expanded universes stories, you see a guy, he gets his armor back and he paints it black because he's looking for justice for a killer. In the Star Wars Clone Commando series, which anybody should read or listen to, Karen Travis, they're fantastic. One of the main characters, his name is Cal Scarata. He wears gold armor, and it's for vengeance. I cannot recall exactly who he's trying to put vengeance on.
You'll have to read the books. But you have a little list here of known armor color meanings?
Yes.
So gray, we got mourning a lost love. Red, honoring a parent. Black's justice. Gold's vengeance. Green's for duty.
You laughing at duty?
Yeah. Blue's reliability. Orange, a lust for life. White, a new start.
Yeah, I do see white a couple different times, but in a lot of instances you see it. It's not necessarily meaning a new start.
Interesting.
Jango, obviously he had the silver armor, no meaning whatsoever. Boba, I guess Boba's was the same armor. That's what it originally looked like prior to Jango coloring it that way.
Mm.
But the Boba look is, I guess, the original colored look. They also has the little patch that Boba has, the Protectors of Conquered Dawn. That came from Jango's adopted father. See the little patch he has right there on his chest, right beneath where his wrist rocket is, or flamethrower is? See that little white...
On his chest?
Yeah, and you see that little white dash?
By his hand?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah.
It would be on his right side of his breastplate. That's for the Protectors of Conquered Dawn. That came from Jango Fett's adopted father, who we saw get nailed And that is all I have for you on Mandalorians. The summation of the culture. I felt it was most important to have this deep dive before we actually jumped into the show, just because there's a lot of history. And as you had already mentioned, there's a lot of things that they talk about in the show that would have no relevance on anybody who doesn't know about them.
Right. I think that's a very useful article. I definitely learned a few things. It's very nice.
Cool. Got any questions, thought, theories, opinions on this?
Let's see.
I figured for next time we can jump into the show.
Yeah, no. It's I think this is actually a worthy launch pad, because I feel like a lot of for those that have stuck around with us for our first season, which hopefully after maybe we'll see, but it'll be releasing soon. A lot of these we kind of are establishing a framework for a lot of these, and I think The Mandalorian is no exception. Because although the show does a great job at keeping exposition kind of to a minimum, in the sense that you can kind of, I think one of the greatest parts about the Mandalorian series is that you can be a complete newbie, not only to Mandalorians but to Star Wars in general, and you can dive into it and really kind of have an appreciation for it.
Yeah.
I mentioned to Tyler off camera that I'm showing it to my girlfriend for the first time, and she's only seen like the movies, and she's been able to understand it very well.
Yeah,
and it's
good. It's good jumping.
It's very good.
It doesn't pull too many things from a lot of places.
Yeah,
so you can watch it standalone.
And a lot of this, especially I think The Mandalorian and Andor, honestly, they both do a very good job at, if they do kind of reference something that's more obscure or that the more educated Star Wars populace would know, they will give a certain amount of exposition necessary for it.
Except in Andor, when they show the fucking necklace from the Rakata, they just don't mention it whatsoever.
Yeah, that was a fucking
Had me
trip.
pause in the show and be like,
I know.
did they just fucking say that?
And then we talked about it, we're like, what the fuck was that? And then
Sort of that.
Honestly, actually, also with Andor, when they hit the freaking Thrawn, and no one knows who the fuck Thrawn is if they haven't seen anything else. Yeah.
Apparently he's going to be in the new Ahsoka show that's coming out.
Oh, is he?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's coming out at the end of this month, actually. We're in August right now.
Yep, supposedly there's going to be that. I think there was another show in the works, and then apparently there's either supposed to be a show
there was supposed to be the one that takes place a thousand years before or whatever.
No, not even that. There's another one that's like
in between this one.
Yeah, well, another one in this same area of the Star Wars canon.
What was the other one called?
The other one's like the Acolyte.
Acolyte, that's what.
Yeah, there's the Acolyte for sure.
I'm excited for that one. I always love the
ones in the past.
The BBY ones, yeah. Those ones always rich.
There's so much more history, so much rich history that goes on back there. I don't know why they didn't.
Plus, the Force was a lot more wild. You didn't have the whole rule of two. You got like random people come out of the woodwork for no reason with like lightsabers, and you had my favorites in there, Zoshan, some beasts.
Yeah.
I would love to see a Zoshan series.
Probably never.
No, I highly doubt it.
You'd have to make it yourself.
Yeah, no, maybe we'll make a. If this podcast gets good, we can start getting money.
I'd love to do something like that.
We'll do that.
Love it. Even if it's just like comics or like something.
Yeah,
I'd love
for sure.
to make shit like that.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, I would say the Mandalorian show, especially near the third season, they really started to like drop some bombs in terms of like what the hell is going on, like where are we? At that point, it would have been more imperative to like have some background knowledge.
Yeah, because I think that was interesting because. Actually, I think for the entire first season, you didn't really need to know anything.
No,
because it was very much cowboy in space, but with he's got Beskar on.
Yeah.
He was kind of the Wild West doing bounty hunter stuff, pistol whipping, and he's got like his little baby sidekick. Yeah. But towards the end, things start getting a little bit more serious. Especially with the third season, where you're like, these are actual monumental moments for Mandalorians as a species. So you kind of have to know a little bit about what's going on, especially for the planet.
Mm-hmm.
I honestly wanted to know a little bit more about, in the third season, when they go to the Mandalorian cities. I forget what the line is. I should have come prepared, but there's a line that Bo-Katan drops where like this place used to be like bustling with like robots and ships flying around all over the place. Like, I kind of wonder if she's referencing those old...
When Mandalore, the planet, got bombed in 700 BBY, the first time around, they created those cities, those spheres and cube cities that you see in the Clone Wars. Those would have gotten bombed by the Empire. So it could have been that's what she was discussing. Because that's where we are introduced to her, because she was Duchess Satine's sister.
Oh, is Bo-Katan actually Duchess Satine's sister? Mm-hmm. See, this is why I need to watch...
Duchess Satine Kryze and Bo-Katan Kryze. Both of Clan Kryze, but Duchess Satine split from that because she wanted to be part of the new peaceful Mandalorians, and Bo-Katan was like, no.
Bo-Katan got the better genes.
Well, yeah, Bo-Katan was on the other side during the Clone Wars. She was with Death Watch. She was an enemy. And then she comes back in the 7th season, which you should watch, and that'll catch you up on some other things that happened.
I was just talking about Katie Sackhoff, but yeah, no, that's totally fine.
Yeah, she is a munch.
The 2%. Did you hear about that legend? By the way, there was a meme. This is sidetracking just a little bit, but there's obviously the podcast that is very famous that has Katie Sackhoff, where she's talking about like Bo-Katan, and the whole 2% meme came from that, where she's basically like, I don't know what it is, man, because you got like, maybe like whatever percent, 50-40%, like Bo-Katan, 20% hate Bo-Katan, like 10%, they're impartial, and then like 2% want me to sit on their face, and then everyone's just like, only 2%. So then all her fan base suddenly became certified 2%er, and so this guy like brought up an autograph. He like went to her for like an autograph or whatever, and he had like a thing, and she signed his thing that said verified 2%er, and I'm like, what a fucking legend, what a beast of a man. And he's like, guys, I've done it. I've fulfilled.
I've done it. I am the true man.
I am a surgeon.
Yeah, no, it was a beast moment.
Fantastic. But yeah, there was at least one other show in the mix with like the Mandalorian, Ahsoka, and then there's supposedly some movie or I think they said it was a movie that's supposed to wrap them all together.
Nice.
And tie them all up.
Good, because I think that was the number one question that not only I had, but also my girlfriend kind of had, which was like, what the fuck was Ahsoka doing that was so important that she couldn't train Grogu? You know
She's
what I mean?
looking for Ezra Bridger, another Jedi who went missing fighting Thrawn.
But do they mention that explicitly in the show? I don't think they mention it in the slightest.
But that was the quest she was on. That lines up with what was going on, because that had happened.
Because that was much needed clarity for me in the series.
That happened just before. That happened BBY. That was like one BBY. He disappeared. Obviously the fall of the Empire. 9 years later, everyone's still trying to catch up with what the fuck went down.
Right.
And I think I don't know if she was super active in like the defeating of the Empire later on, especially when Luke rose to prominence. I'm not sure what she was doing.
It'd be kind of interesting to see when they met.
Who?
Ahsoka and Luke.
Yeah, I don't know if it's talked about.
Because I think
there's a lot of books and shit out there.
I mean, obviously the original trilogy was done in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
So there was no lore out there. There were no side characters, disparate Jedi. There were none of this. But now that we have the knowledge of all those, other Jedi, do you think it's feasible that between Episode 5 and Episode 6, Luke might have either met or known about another Jedi at least?
Maybe.
I'd say probably not, though, because he was still inquiring to Yoda as to like the
between Episode 4 and 5, he was basically just fighting with the Rebel Alliance.
Right.
Because we saw by Episode 5, he still wasn't really super trained as a Jedi at all.
But between 5 and 6, I mean, the guy made his own lightsaber, which is pretty advanced knowledge for someone that doesn't know anything.
Well, he got all that information from Obi-Wan. From his hut had all that information.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it had the forge to make the crystals. It had the instructions on how to do it. I mean, he was guided towards that knowledge, but
where is that information? Like books? Yeah,
books.
Cool.
This book right here.
I think that would be really cool to go into because, I mean, Ewan McGregor right now, currently, he
supposedly got this book from Obi-Wan's place.
Right. Ewan McGregor has consistently mentioned this as of the date right now, August of 23. That he wants to do another season of Kenobi. But, I mean, people are like, well, what other stories are there to tell? But if this is like a thing where like he's setting up a forge for future Luke, that would be really cool to see.
Mm.
I don't know if it's worthy of building a plot around, obviously, but I think it's just kind of cool to think about.
Well, they destroyed a lot of things with that too, because they had him unburying lightsabers in like the fucking desert when he just had them sitting around his house. Like that was never a thing. I don't know where they could take it. They're most likely just gonna create their own shit.
I don't think they designed it to have extra components to it.
No, because there was already stories like what went on with Obi-Wan after Episode 3. Ton of stories.
I feel like there's also
came across Boba Fett in one instance.
Well, there's also the kind of the unresolved Inquisitor movement that was kind of introduced.
Like just the Inquisitor as a whole, like where they went.
Well, yeah, how the fuck did they die? You know what I mean?
Oh well, what a lot of there was 10 or 12 of them, something like that.
Mm.
But a lot of them already had deaths. A lot of them had deaths in different books, video games,
But there's not a lot.
shows.
My kind of rationality for that question is that there's not an incredible amount of time between those two,
20 years ish. No,
like
not
19 years, yeah.
But he got all those Inquisitors. Almost all of them were ex-Jedi.
Hmm.
He didn't like retrain them how to use the Force. He basically just subverted them to become evil.
Right.
At least 3 of them I know had deaths within comic books. A few more of them died during the Rebels series.
Mm.
Video games, I think Fallen Order, one of them dies. At least one of them dies.
Hmm.
They were just plot devices.
Right, right.
They're not super. I'd be.
They weren't canonical staples.
No, they weren't meant to be that. They're pretty shallow. They
Mm.
were just their placeholders. They were like basically bad guys for whatever. It seems like by the time of like episode 5 or 6, there's like I don't even know if any of them are still alive.
I kind of wish instead of the Inquisitors, they kind of added back in the Force Wrecking Ball from Force Unleashed.
Starkiller.
Starkiller, yeah.
That would be cool.
Because that was, I feel like that was a cooler.
I just have one dude out there, just
Combination.
like
Yeah.
the super hyper. Yeah, because those Inquisitors, they were nothing. They were so dumb.
They were just kind of like
Lame.
they just happened to have lightsabers. That was essentially
They were
all
lame.
it
They
was.
were so dumb.
Yeah, I mean, freaking Uncle Owen the farmer was able to hold off one of them. The fucking farmer, bro. Granted, I won't lie. The Aunt Peru and Uncle Owen coming in clutch for Luke was pretty.
I love
pretty
that
cool.
absolutely,
Yeah.
but they should not be able to go toe.
But on paper, that shouldn't
don't make sense.
Yeah, no, that's something that only happens in plot, really. It's that is Naruto style plot armor.
Yeah, I think like the main Inquisitor or the Inquisitor, he dies in the Rebel series, like first season. So they introduce the other ones. I think Darth Maul kills another one of them or 2.
Mm. So what was your wrap up soon? But what was your favorite season of The Mandalorian?
Was not season 3. No,
I think Adam would agree with you on that
not
one.
happy with season 3.
Mm.
They dropped a lot of balls in that one. And then it's annoying too because he didn't get his ship until Book of Boba. So it's like I would probably say season 2.
Season 2?
Season 2 had a lot of rising action. With season 1, there are just too many dull moments. I mean, it's also the first season, so it is what it is.
Right.
But I think the second season really had a lot of development for a lot of people. Really cool moments. It wasn't too heavy-handed. Like, it was still... You could still kind of stay above everything without getting too in-depth, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And you already knew the enemy coming in, which was cool, which was fine. But they didn't really show him as, like, a force until, like, way later on.
Mm.
So that was really cool. And then that ending scene with fucking Luke. And like,
Yeah,
this is Baby
very
Yoda finally leaving. Like, hell yeah.
Yeah.
I would have been okay if they had left it at season 2 and not made a third one. Because he didn't really have any obligation short of that. What about you?
Word. I would agree. I think season 2. Season 1's close though, because season 1 was great.
Season 1 was really good.
I think that season 1 definitely opened things up for season 2. Season 2 just had too many monumental moments. I mean, the introduction of Bo-Katan Kryze, the exploration of his religion, his cult a little bit more.
Yeah.
I thought that was really cool. You got to learn a little bit more about, the armor and things of that nature. You also got a lot of really cool, exploration that you had in the first season, which I think was one of the greatest strengths of the first season, was that he was kind of, like I said, pistol wielding, kind of roaming around, which was really cool.
Big iron on his hip.
Big iron on his hip. We learned a little bit more about Grogu. I mean, obviously the reintroduction of Boba Fett was amazing.
Yeah,
because
that was so cool.
I heard of that as a rumor and I didn't believe it. And so when it actually happened, I was like, oh shit.
Brought back Cobb Vanth.
Yeah.
Tatooine G. Oh man.
Yep.
Who got fucking roasted in Book of Boba.
Yeah. We'll talk about that another time. I think we've already talked about it briefly at some points on the podcast, but yeah, no, Tyler and I have differing opinions of that scene. Because I'm a big Cad Bane fanboy, so
I don't mind Cad Bane. Cobb Vanth did not deserve
no,
that at all.
He didn't deserve
what
that.
What did he do? He did nothing.
He was just chilling in his sand
He was just a good guy.
Word. All right. So
I think next time we'll actually stick to the script and break into the Mandalorian show.
Yeah. Thanks for sticking with us on our deep dive to the origins of the Mandalorians as an individual people. for more Fandora's Box. Check out our other episodes. We got plenty coming out, and we are constantly making new ones. So thank you guys for listening. This has been Fandora's Box.